Hello and welcome to the Cross to Bear podcast in collaboration with Free Thinking Ministries. I'm Phil Bear, your host, and we're going to talk about open theism today, which is quite an ambitious subject matter, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed, and I think it's something that deserves continued dialogue. So my guest today is one of my favorite people, and his name is Dale Glover. So I'm going to bring him on and say hello real quick. Hello, Dale. How are you?
Hey Phil, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Still standing in the middle of Jerusalem, I see.
Yeah, it's my favorite place. So I'm I just like to stay put,
That's just where you live, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I got the open air. I got everything I need right there.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. My question is, do you ever eat? That's or sleep, or do you just stand there the whole time?
Well, I'm okay. I'll have to reveal the truth. I'm not human. I'm a robot. So I'm totally determined as to
You're
keep
just a
this
wax figure standing in Jerusalem, and everything you do is determined.
pretty much, yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
I've been good on my end and stuff. I don't know if you caught it, but just last week I did kind of my ultimate resurrection panel that I've been planning for years with kind of a celebration of Gary Habermas and his 4 volume magnum opus on the resurrection. So I brought on a bunch of scholars: Mike Lacona, Sean McDowell, Tony Costa, and Ben Shaw, to kind of celebrate Gary's legacy and his research. So that went great.
Well, wonderful. I didn't actually catch that, so I'll have to. Can I find it in your playlist?
Yep, it's on my videos on YouTube.
Okay, great. Well, that sounds exciting. So I'll have to check that out, and I'll see if I can provide any feedback that I might have. Of course, I'm kind of a gnat on the shoulders of the. Let's see. I'm not a dwarf standing on the shoulders of the giants because that would mean that I hold the same honor as C.S. Lewis. So what I'll say is that I'm a gnat on the top of the head of the dwarf who is standing on the shoulders of the giants.
Nice. That's yeah, very a great way to put it. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I would love to interact with a lot more scholars on my channel, and that would be exciting. There's a whole lot of material that I think still needs to be covered. I don't know that our work as apologists is ever going to be done, or apologists, or theologians, or philosophers, whatever we want to call ourselves. We have ongoing work that I think is probably never going to be done until we leave this veil of tears. So I look forward to doing a lot of that work and being a participant. And I hope that I can contribute something of value. And I see that you've already contributed a whole lot of content of value, and I appreciate you for that reason. And I also have learned a great deal from you. So you're a great source of knowledge for me, I'm probably kind of selfish here because I think I might learn a whole lot more from you than you might learn from me. So, I'm learning more as I go. So maybe we can reverse that ratio a little bit at some point.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I do think it's a mutual two-way street. I mean, I learn from you as well, and it's always interesting getting your take on certain issues and stuff like that. And there have been times where you've managed to even change my mind on stuff. So I see it as a two-way street on my end. But I appreciate your kindness.
Yeah, well, you have changed my mind on some things as well. So that's also a mutual benefit I think we have. Man sharpens man as iron sharpens iron, and I like that whole formula. So
Awesome.
I want to make sure that my audio is okay, that you can hear me all right.
Yep, you're loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm using a microphone, a podcasting microphone that my wife used a long time ago before we were actually even married.
Wow.
And but I used it the last time I did a podcast with Drew Mack on the Provisionist Perspective channel, and I wasn't using it right, so there was a lot of room noise, and it sounded like I was kind of in an echo chamber. But now I think I've got this thing dialed in correctly, and so I'm excited that my audio is hopefully going to be better from now on. So if
Yeah,
anything ever falls apart, be sure and let me know in real time. Yeah, so
I will.
well, our topic today is open theism, and I announced this. I think it was yesterday on my Facebook page and on the Mere Molinism group, and Warren McGrew lit up when I did that, and and gave me a bunch of resources and asked me if if I had seen all of the videos in his playlist about open theism and dynamic omniscience. And I said I've seen the relevant ones, and he said, "Well, then you'll have no excuses tomorrow."
Yeah, well, I saw he was already in your live chat talking about his playlist there. So, yeah. He's,
Oh, is he in the live chat now?
I don't know if he's there now, but he left a message before the show even started. I checked it about 15 minutes before, and sure enough, there was Idol Killer talking about dynamic omniscience.
Okay. Well, I'm not seeing that right now, and I'm not sure why actually.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, because it go once you go live, it deletes all of the comments that are posted before. So we kind
Okay.
of lost that actually. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Idol Killer, Warren he's one of my favorite people also, and I'm sorry that he actually may be in competition with you for some of my favorite people. But I'll make you the king of the hill at least for today, and
Okay.
then the next time I have a conversation with Warren, I'll put him at the top of the list and say, "Oh, you're Warren, you're my favorite person, Warren." And then when I'm talking to Tim Stratton, I'll say, "Hey, oh Tim, you're my favorite person."
That's fine. If I'm king
So,
for a day in Phil's world, that's good for me. He can have tomorrow.
okay. Well, we have a guy in my life, Spaghetti Man. He says, "Hey, Phil and Dale, no clue what open theism is, so we'll definitely look back at this. Unfortunately, for my desire to interact in real time, I'll be loaded up a dumpster in the next few hours. Haha. Okay. Well, so we can dig right in, and before Luke has to actually exit, if he's going to have to go here pretty soon. But if we don't get to all this, we can always get it later. He may have actually dropped off, but open theism is quite a broad topic, and there's a lot to it, and it has a lot of implications theologically, philosophically, and I believe that it even has implications for our discipleship. And if that's the case, it's absolutely worthy of discussion and of a continuation of a dialogue. There's been a great amount of ink spilled on this topic, and there have been just scores of videos and conversations that are available to anyone who wants to review them. And so this is just going to be kind of a drop in the ocean, just a and
The splash.
but I think we can maybe move the conversation forward, and if we can, and if we do, then I will feel like this is definitely worthwhile. But it's a topic that I'm interested in because of the fact that I am a mere Molinist, and I am part of Free Thinking Ministries now, and Molinism is kind of one of the anchors of Free Thinking Ministries because that's where Tim Stratton lies in the spectrum of theological principles. And so I align with Tim quite a bit, and he's been an enormous influence on me in that regard. But open theism represents a challenge to Molinism to a certain degree, and so there are some interacting issues that I think are worth talking about from a Molinist perspective. And but even if not from a Molinist perspective, also just from a biblical perspective and a classical theological perspective. So I don't know whether we'll be able to touch on all of those issues today. We're probably not going to scratch the surface, but at least we can start a conversation, and hopefully there can be some interaction, and there can be some even some pushback, because I would welcome that, and I think I think it's still extremely productive to talk about these things. None of these issues have been settled as far as I'm concerned, you know. And the other thing that that we'll talk about is theories of time, because theories of time have a lot to do with open theism and with theology in general. And and if we get to it, if we have time, I'm going to share my theory of time, which, as far as I can tell, is kind of has some unique aspects to it. And because my name is Phil, I'm calling it the P theory of time. And there's the A theory of time, there's the B theory of time, and I reject both of those. And so I'm actually gonna I'm actually gonna articulate my P theory of time. I don't know whether we'll get a chance to do that today or not, but if we do, that'll be great. So, but do you have any opening thoughts about open theism, and how does it what is the relationship between open theism and your theology and your philosophy, Dale?
Yeah.
And I'm putting you on
So
the spot here.
no, well, that's why I'm here to to talk about this. So it makes
Yeah.
sense. But no, so like yourself, I am have always been a Molinist, and I guess for lack of a better word, mere Molinism fits. I remember doing a show with the former Calvinist Tyler Vela on mere Molinism, and I'd never heard that term. I think I had just learned it right before I did that show from people like Tim Stratton and stuff like that. So I fully endorse Molinism. I reject open theism, and I think it is a false view, both philosophically. I think there are some issues with perfect being theism that comes up, specifically about God's
Mhm.
omniscience, and also I think it clearly contradicts the Bible. So there are biblical issues there as well.
Right. Yeah.
And
Well,
oh, sure.
nope. Go ahead.
Last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back to you. In terms of the philosophy of time, though, another thing that was new that Warren actually introduced me to was this notion. We did a shows on dynamic omniscience on the Faith
Hmm.
Unaltered podcast, and I realized to some extent I am a dynamic omniscience person. I'm not an open theist, but I do believe that God's knowledge is dynamic. It changes from day to day. So, for example, He knows today. He knows the proposition. It's true that today is Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. Tomorrow, His knowledge will change. He'll know that today is Thursday, May 22nd, 2025, and stuff like that. So I do actually agree with dynamic omniscience to an extent, in the sense that God's knowledge changes based on tense from day to day.
Okay. Well, and I have some thoughts about that, but before I do, let's actually just lay out what open theism is for Luke's sake, if he's still here, and and also just to establish our kind of a template for our discussion today. And I'm going to give you my understanding of open theism, and I'm going to admit at the outset that it might not be perfect. I have studied open theism to a moderate extent, I think to a respectable extent. And last year, I was asked to come and speak at a church in Denver about my position on open theism. And that church actually is pretty much grounded in open theism. The pastor is an open theist, and the majority of the people who attend that church are open theists. And I got introduced to that church last year when I went to see Leighton Flowers speak at that same church last fall. And when I attended that service where Leighton was speaking, Tim Barber was also there. And Tim Barber is an open theist, and but I believe Leighton Flowers is not an open theist, if I'm not mistaken. And so I got to meet a few people at that church, and I made some friends there. And since then, I have had some long discussions with those friends at that church who are open theists. And I gained a deeper understanding of open theism, not only from the literature, but also from the people who actually subscribe to that theory of open theism. And it gave me kind of a human perspective on it. And that's why I think that there are a lot of relationships between open theism and discipleship, because I gained kind of that insight from my conversations with people who are open theists. So, and but let me just lay out my understanding of open theism, and one of them, the first one is that if I understand this correctly, and I am not infallible, so if I need to be corrected, I am absolutely open to correction. But my understanding of open theism is basically that God is, I think that in open theism, God is a time bound being. I think that he operates and functions within the scope of time. And therefore he is a he, he is a time related being. He exists in time, and he experiences the flow of time, and therefore his interaction with creation and with people, with his people, or whether it's his people or not, is all time related. And so the one of the main ideas of open theism, as far as I understand it, is that God is omniscient, that he knows all things, but the qualification is that he only knows what is knowable. So God knows all that is knowable, but he does not know whatever is not knowable. And open theism has specific claims as to what is knowable and what is not knowable. And more specifically, that the future is not knowable, and therefore God does not know the future perfectly. And if that's the case, then God learns based on how events unfold in time, and he adds to his knowledge, because once things occur in time, once events occur in time and states occur in time, he gains knowledge of those states and of those occurrences because they are now knowable, whereas prior to that, they were not knowable. And so that assumes that God is a time bound being. He does not transcend time, he actually exists within time. And and that is one of the biggest concerns that I have about open theism, because omniscience is defined as God knows everything that can possibly be known, but there are some things that cannot possibly be known, and therefore God does not know them until they occur in history. So give me some feedback there, Dale. Do you think that that's an accurate representation of open theism in terms of omniscience and in terms of time?
Absolutely, right. So what open theism? Well, what does that mean? Open to what? Well, it's saying that the future is open. That the future doesn't exist. It kind of assumes an a theory of time, or
Right.
presentism is true. And because of that, the future is open, and God doesn't know in advance in his omniscience. They would say he's omniscient, but he would just say, look, he knows all propositional truths. There is no propositional truth with respect to future contingents. And for that reason, the future it's open, and he comes to learn and gain knowledge of what will happen as it comes to pass and becomes present type thing. So yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying there. Now I will say this, even though okay, what one last thing then, and I'll go back to you. But one thing I do want to stress is that even though I'd go for dynamic omniscience in the sense that God's knowledge can change, right? As for example, tensed knowledge, because I accept an A theory of time and that sort of thing. I would deny this notion that I'm what's called a truth maker maximalist. So I think there are truths that are future tense that pertain to future contingents and stuff like that, and God knows them before that it comes to pass. So that's where I would say I deny the open theist. There are true propositions that are future tense, and God knows them.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then isn't that incompatible with the A theory of time or with presentism?
I don't
Because
think
presentism claims that the future does not exist and therefore is unknowable. And if that's the case, there are no truth makers for the future because the future doesn't exist. You can't have a truth maker for something that doesn't exist.
I would disagree with that. So this is called the grounding objection, and I remember James
Right?
White hammering William Lane Craig on the Unbelievable show a number of years ago on this. And so I am, unlike William Lane Craig, I am a truth maker maximalist. I do think that there is a truth maker, and it is basically existing within God's knowledge of his causal powers and causal potentials and what will come about when he activates, or does one action versus another, such as choosing which world to create from the foundation of the world. Okay, once he knows in advance what, if he activates this causal power, all of the consequences that will come about because of that. So I would ground it in God's causal power, basically.
Okay. Well, so my question for you then is, does that not collapse into determinism?
No, because nothing about God knowing what his causal power will bring about denies that. Okay, well, that includes within the causal chain free will agents that are prime movers within that. So he knows in advance what they will freely choose to do, but it doesn't necessitate or determine what they would do within that causal chain. Does that make
Okay.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just not. I'm not sure I understand how that lines up with presentism because presentism denies that God can have any knowledge of the future because the future does not exist de facto. There's nothing for God to know in the future, and and if the only way that God can know the future is because He causes it, then that's actually a fallacy that exists in determinism that I have gone to great lengths to try to vitiate, and to try to debunk. So, are you talking about causality in terms of simply the creation of an ontological being, or are you talking about causality in terms of God determining or causing something to occur in the future, and therefore He knows it because His causality in the future is what is the truth maker that makes it true, and therefore makes Him able to know it.
So the way I would say this is obviously as Molinist, God has middle knowledge, right, which includes his knowledge of what any free creature, libertarian free creature, would do in any set of circumstances. So I think it's the wrong way to put it, but let's just put it this way. So not chronologically prior to, but logically prior to God choosing which world to create, he can kind of survey. Okay, if I actualize my powers and create this world, then XYZ will all take place. If I create this world, world B, XYZ will, one thing will lead to another, and XYZ will all take place, including um, the fact that Dale, as a free will agent, will choose to place his faith in Christ in the year 2018 or something like that. So, um, yeah, that's it's basically God is causing as the first cause of the universe, creating this world, and then yeah, everything follows. It's predestined, not predetermined necessarily.
Okay, well, let me put a comment on the screen, and you can let me read this, and then Dale, I'll let you comment on it. It says these ideas aren't paired well. If the agents are actually free, they're creating their own possibility in the system. Dale seems to be suggesting God's knowledge is settled from the foundation. So how would you comment on that?
Yeah, so yes, I think it is settled from the foundation in the sense he knows what is going to happen if he creates this world versus another world. He knows in advance. Yeah, okay. Dale and Phil will both freely choose to become Christians, and this and this and this will all happen, leading to the ultimate end. But that doesn't take away the freedom in any way, right? Because there's a difference between fate, something being fated, or sorry, not fated, predestined versus predetermined. Nothing about God knowing what I will choose to do freely means that I'm determined. I still, within this whole causal chain, I'm still a prime mover and I have a dual ability. I can either choose to do or choose to refrain from doing. It's just God knows, okay, I'll use that will to choose to do it or place my faith in Christ in advance.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm hearing something that's extremely important in what you just said, and that is that knowledge is not causal. That God's knowledge of the future does not cause or determine the future. And this is one of the concerns that my open theist friends here in Denver had. And this is one of the reasons why they are so adamant in their belief in open theism. And that is that in their minds, if if the future is settled in the sense that God knows the future perfectly, then that means that everything that happens in the future happened by necessity, will happen by necessity, and must happen, and could not be otherwise. Because if it could be otherwise, then God's knowledge of the future is not perfect. And that was their huge concern. And they were unable to live with the idea that God's perfect knowledge means that the future is settled and cannot be changed or could not be otherwise, and that therefore the future and all the events in the future are are necessary. And what I tried to explain to them is that there's a difference between actuality and necessity. So the fact that God knows the future perfectly means that it will happen the way that he knows that it will happen. But that doesn't mean that it must happen. It doesn't mean that the future and all the choices that we make are necessary. It just simply means that they are actual. So God knows what I will choose tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that what I will choose tomorrow could not have been otherwise.
That's a
So I
modal
am,
fallacy. So sorry,
pardon me?
I was just saying that's a modal fallacy. Basically, it's logically fallacious to make that connection there.
Okay. Well, and so are you tracking with that? Is that a it,
Yeah,
it okay.
that's exactly what I was trying to say myself. I guess you said it in better words there, but well,
Well, my my biggest concern with open theism is that it commits that modal fallacy, and people do not understand that they're committing that modal fallacy, and sometimes it's because they have never been introduced to the concept of modal fallacies or modal logic. But the basic fundamental principle is that if God knows the future, that means the future is actual and it will occur the way he knows that it will occur, but that does not necessitate the future. So it's the fundamental way of differentiating between what is actual and what is necessary. And if you understand modal logic, you'll understand this a little bit more clearly. But at its fundamental level, I think most people can understand the idea that if God knows what is going to happen tomorrow, that doesn't mean that what has happened tomorrow was determined or was necessary. So,
There's there is one. I'll let you finish, but I have one point
no,
after.
no, I'm finished. Go ahead.
There is one point where I'm not sure. It's something I discussed when I was on the Faith Unaltered thing, but I do think that God's knowledge and his middle knowledge in particular are within the causal chain. They play a causal role, but it's not a full cause. It's a partial one at best, right? So it's not like I would deny causal determination or anything like that. But I do think that based on God's middle knowledge, that caused God to, okay, I'm going to create world B rather than this one because this one meets my providential goals better than a world with just pink bunnies or a world where Phil becomes an Eastern Orthodox or something like that. You know what I mean? So I do think his knowledge is in the causal chain, at least as a partial cause, but that does not entail causal determinism or anything like that. Does that make sense? Or
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that because to think that knowledge is causal at all, to me, I'm not sure that I can affirm that knowledge is ever causal in any sense because I think that's a category mistake. I think that the fact that God knows what will happen does not mean that he is causing what will happen, whether that cause is deterministic or not. I don't think that causal relationship even exists at all. So so there may be a little bit of a divergence here between how you understand this and how I do. And if there ever is a divergence like that, then my understanding is correct, and Dale, your understanding is obviously flawed. So
well, yeah. So in a way, you're right, right? Because the act of creation was a free will choice. So in a sense, okay, God was a prime mover. His free will choice was the prime mover. But I would just say that the knowledge played, him making that choice was in part caused at least by as an influence on him, right? Because okay, he knew this world's better than that, and that played a causal role as an influence on him to go, okay, I choose this one or not. But I see what you're saying. Like, if God's a prime mover, then yeah, I guess the question is, are influences on our free will, do they play any role in a causal chain at all, or at least as partial causes, or would you say no, they're totally outside the causal chain?
yeah, that's a good distinction. The distinction between influence and cause. And I would say that there are influences in our decisions, but those influences don't determine our decisions. And that's where the deterministic trap actually exists, because C.S. Lewis spoke a lot about whether or not my desires are actually relevant, or whether they are play a role in my decisions. And he came up with the analogy of the person who is drowning. So I'm on the beach, I'm standing on the beach, and I'm looking out over the ocean, and I can see that somebody out there is drowning. And I look around, and there's nobody else here. And so my there's a conflict in my desires, and therefore you could say there's a conflict in my influences. I have a moral impulse to go save that person, but I also have the cognitive awareness that if I go out and try to save that person, I might drown myself. And so I'm taking a big risk if I'm going to go out and try to save that person from drowning. And so the two influences that are at war in my mind are my desire to be altruistic and save someone if I can possibly save them, over and against my desire for self-preservation. And and what C.S. Lewis argued was that there are those two desires. There's the desire to save someone and the desire for self-preservation and to protect myself from drowning. And C.S. Lewis argued that there is a third impulse that is actually different from the other two, and that there's a third impulse that says, I should try to save that person regardless of the risks involved. And he would say that that came from natural law. That came from the moral, the moral law that God has built into everyone's heart and everyone's mind. And so those are all influences, but the primary moral influence that overrides the other influences in my mind are not deterministic, but I have this intuitive knowledge that I ought to follow that higher moral impulse. and and so that's where that's where the distinction between what influences our decisions and what determines our decisions actually plays a role, because I am not determined to make the choice to go out and save that person, even though the natural law impulse says that I should, that I ought to. And and I think I think it's a good way of avoiding the trap of determinism, but still maintaining the the fact that there are influences in our minds and there are influences in the world that are real and that are not illusory. And so I think that's a good distinction to be made. But I don't know if that speaks to what you were saying or not. But you
I think it
can.
does. Yeah, I think the best way to put it, for me, I think these influences, they're definitely in the causal chain. Like they are partial causes, but all of the influences together are insufficient to explain, well, why did I choose this or that? Like none of the influences can fully explain or fully cause or determine my choice. But
Right.
they do play partial. They're in the causal chain for me. I would say that they're partial causes as to why I chose X versus Y, but they're not sufficient to be a contrastive explanation.
Okay. So would you say that you are allowing them to be causal?
Allowing them.
Yeah. In other
Um,
words, if you have an influence that is moving you in a certain direction, even though it's not determining you, you're calling that influence causal or a cause. And so if you make a decision to go in that direction because of that influence, is that a matter of you allowing that influence to be the cause of your decision? Am I understanding that correctly for you?
I think so. Yeah, because I do believe we have the ability as a free choice to orient our wills towards certain influences versus others. And this is what I think acrasia is, right? Weakness of the will is kind of we give up what philosopher Tamar Shapiro calls the burden of freedom, right? Where we orient our wills towards, the influences that are and reasons that are best for us or something like that, and we temporarily orient our wills to lesser influences or something like that. We let go of that burden type thing. So yeah, I would agree that it can be a free will choice, and often is where we orient our wills in terms of influences on us.
Okay. Well, let me put up a comment or a question here from Kyle Hart. He says, remove mankind for a moment. Can God do anything new, even to him? Does he retain free will for himself? Now, those are two separate questions, and I'm not sure if there is a if there's an inference being made here, and that is that if God cannot do anything new to himself, does that mean that he does not have free will for himself? And so I'll let you have first crack at that question, and then I'll come around and correct you. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Dale. I
yeah, no,
am
of course, this is great.
I
Yeah,
am I am I am so mean. I'm just so mean.
mean fella. Let's see the abuse I
Oh
put
my
up with,
gosh.
guys. But no, okay.
This
So
is what this is, Dale. This is a man trying to be humble, but pretending not to be, just for a laugh, just to be humorous.
yeah, no, I'm
So
enjoying it. Like, hey, it's about
yeah,
truth. We're two brothers in Christ trying to work out the truth,
yeah.
and we've got great audience people too. So I'll answer the second question. Of course, look, without mankind, without creation, God has free will. The act of creation was a libertarian free will choice on his part, on God's part. So the answer is absolutely yes. He doesn't just retain it; he has it, and he's the source of all free will. We have free will because he had it first. So now, can God do anything new, even to him? So I would say yes. Well, okay, so yeah, without mankind, absolutely, yeah. God could have created time, and then but not create mankind, just create the same universe, just without mankind, and then that would be new because at that point, okay, God would be temporal, and he would be living day to day. Each and every single day would be new. Again, assuming an A theory of time is true. So yeah, mankind is not necessary for something new, for God to experience something new or something like that.
Okay. Well, look, I'll give you a little bit, a few thoughts on the free will. I think you nailed it as far as whether God has free will. Because if God does not have free will, that means that something outside of himself is an antecedent condition that necessitates his choices, his decisions, and there is nothing outside of himself. So God cannot be determined, his decisions cannot be determined by antecedent conditions because there are no antecedent conditions. So everything that he chooses originates in himself. And and the term originates is the key word here, because what we at Three Thinking Ministries, we have had a lot of discussions about this, and that is that for human beings, our libertarian free will consists of two components. The first one is that we are the originators of our decisions. The second one is that we can choose among a range of possibilities. And in that sense, that makes up free will, libertarian free will for human beings. Libertarian free will consists of those two things. We can choose from a range of possibilities, all of which are consistent with our nature. Now, we could argue that God cannot lie, that God cannot do something that is immoral, because if he did, then he would actually be negating his own nature, that he would be violating his own nature. And Orthodox theologians, I think, would always affirm that God cannot violate his own nature. Because if he could, then he could lie, but the scriptures tell us that God cannot lie. Hebrews 6:18. It is impossible for God to lie. So what that means is that God does not have libertarian freedom in the sense that he can choose certain possibilities because those possibilities are incompatible with his nature. However, he does have libertarian free will in that he is the originator of all of his decisions, all of his choices, and all of his actions. And so the idea that God cannot lie does not mean that he does not have libertarian free will, because even though he cannot do certain things that violate his nature, he can still originate choices from himself. And so that means that he could have created animals that are all purple and have 14 legs, but he didn't. He created animals, most of which have 4 legs or 2 legs or 8 legs or whatever it happens to be. He may have never chosen to create an animal that has 14, exactly 14 legs. You create a centipede, that has multiple legs, 100, whatever it happens to be. And so there's a whole range of options that God chose from, but all of them were consistent with his nature, and the fact that he was the originator of those choices, and that he chose from among those options that were available to him, that establishes the fact that he has free will. Now, the other question that, and you can push back on that in a second if you want to, or if you need to, but the other part of this question is, can God do anything new even to him? And I would answer that question as absolutely. He can do something that he's never done logically prior to what he did. Now, the problem is that as soon as you say, can God do anything new, that introduces the concept of time. In other words, can he do something that he never did before? And as soon as we say never did before, we're invoking the concept of time when we did that. What before now? Can he do something tomorrow that he didn't do today? Because that implies that God is a time-bound being, that he operates in time only, and does not transcend time. So I would say yes, he can do something new in the context of him doing something within the flow of time and in creation. And we could argue that the crucifixion and the gospel and the resurrection of Christ was something that he did at a certain point in time that he did not do prior to that point in time. So if that's the case, in that sense, yes, he can do something new that he had not done before within the scope of created time. But if you apply this to God's transcending time, then no, he does not do anything new, because he is not a time-bound being, and he does not do things in sequence in his eternal state as God. If that's the case, no, he doesn't do anything new. So when it says even to him, that's kind of the loaded gun there, isn't it? Because if I don't think that he would do anything new that is new to him. In other words, something that he was not aware of before, something he didn't know that he was going to do before, because God in his eternal state cannot do something that he did that surprised himself. But he can do something that's new within the scope of creation that he did not do before. If that was because if that's not the case, then that obviates the whole flow of time within creation. And so he can do something new to us, but he knew that he was going to die on the cross as the second person of the Trinity for our sins. He knew that he was going to rise from the dead. And so nothing surprised him within the scope of time, even within the scope of time. But that doesn't mean that he couldn't do something new within the scope of time. And the other distinction that needs to be made here is, can God do something new, or can God know something new? Can God know something that he did not know before? And that also implies that God's knowledge is shaped within the scope of time. And I don't believe that it is. I believe that God's knowledge transcends time and that he sees all of time and the entire flow of history and creation, and he sees it all. It's all laid before him, and he can observe, so to speak, every event in time wherever it occurs in time, even though to us it is the future. So what happens in time is that in creation, time has a playhead, so to speak. That there is a marker that is moving forward and is dividing the future from the past, and the future is is constantly becoming the past through the flow of time, and that flow of time is real. It's like a spotlight. Some theologians have called it a spotlight, where the spotlight moves through the timeline, and the spotlight is what we call the present, and that present is constantly moving and is never static. So I've been talking a whole lot here, so I'm gonna yield the floor to you, and tell me what you think of all these things, if you can remember them all.
So I found your take is interesting. So I guess your take on time, what you're calling, what did you call it? The P theory of time, is
P
kind of like,
theory, yeah.
is it kind of along the lines of like McTaggart's view, where he denied the B theory and the A theory? Yeah.
Maybe. I actually, I mean, it would be rather difficult for me to compare my theory of time with a whole lot of different scholars. I mean, I don't have exhaustive knowledge of what all the scholars out there have said about time, but I do share this in common with a lot of scholars and a lot of thinkers, and that is that I reject both the A theory of time and the B theory of time, because the A theory of time is closely related to presentism, even though it's not identical to it. I think that all presentists affirm the A theory of time, but not all people who affirm the A theory of time are necessarily presentists. But I do reject both the A theory and the B theory.
Okay. Okay. I guess where I want to go. Let's start actually with God and his relationship to the temporal creation, whatever that means, kind of thing. So I guess I would want to say that, look, if creation is temporal in whatever way you want to say, the P theory of time, whatever that is, then that entails that God must be temporal, because he stands in certain relations. As you said, when Jesus became incarnate, he had temporal extension, the dimension of temporal extension, and he had temporal location, 30 AD or 6 BC, whenever he was born, to through to 30 AD, and he had these temporal dimensions, and God the Father, he stood in temporal relationships, just as we stand in temporal relationships to God the Father and the Holy Spirit. And I think in virtue of those, it's just illogical to say that God is timeless. How can he stand in these temporal relations if he's not temporal, if he doesn't have temporal dimensions at all?
Okay. Well, we've got some noise. Oh, there it stopped. Okay.
I'll mute myself. It's my fan. I'll just mute myself when I'm not talking.
Oh, okay. So what I'm hearing is what I think may be a false dichotomy, that God can be atemporal and temporal both at the same time. No pun intended. So, in other words, God can transcend time because he created time. Time is his creation. Time is contingent, and God is not contingent. And so, since time is contingent, time cannot be eternal, cannot be grounded in his own being, in his own essence, because it's contingent, and it progresses. Anything that progresses is contingent. So so for that reason, I affirm that God is outside of time and that he transcends time. But I also affirm that God can climb into time, so to speak, and that he can stand in relation to time as a being who has the ability to hop in and out of time or to do that simultaneously. He can be within time and transcend time both at the same time. I know I'm using the word time a lot here. So to say that God stands in relation to time, I don't think that necessarily negates the idea that he can also, or that he also does, transcend time. And and this is this we can draw an analogy of his omnipresence, that God is omnipresent, that he exists everywhere. And so therefore God exists. Is God in a swimming pool? Yes, he's in a swimming pool. But is he only in the swimming pool? No, he's also everywhere else. And so, is God in time? Does he stand in relation to time? And can he function within time? Yes. But he also functions outside of time. So the fact that he functions in time does not necessarily mean that he functions only in time. So I don't know if that helps or not, but and you can pick that apart if you want to, and tell me that I'm all wet.
Yeah, I just don't think it makes sense logically speaking to go with the both and approach. And also, okay, so the one first thing you said is okay, you think he can be outside and then come in and then go out. So I don't think that
Well,
can.
well, that's actually that was a miss that
Uh,
I misspoke when I said that.
let me just give
I'm not
the
saying that he exists in time and then hops out of time. I shouldn't have used the word hop, because I believe that he exists in time and that he can function in time, but that he also transcends time simultaneously. And so
fair enough.
just throw away my whole idea of hopping in and out of time, because that
But
that
you,
was that was an extremely poor way to put it.
I was about to give you the meme of the century and the little clip for the short there. I was going to say once you go temporal, you can never go back. But
That's William Lane Craig's position.
yeah, yeah, and I agree with
Yeah.
that. So okay, yeah, so I
And
just
I disagree with William Lane Craig's position there. I don't believe that once he created that he became a time bound being. I think God still transcends time. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And I know it's the epitome of of arrogance of me to disagree with William Lane Craig.
no, of course, no, a lot of people do, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, okay. So one last thing. So apart from the temporal, I just yeah, I on my end, I don't. I think it's paradoxical, and contradictory. I would say to say he has temporal dimensions and relations, and he at the same time he doesn't. So that's fine. That's what about
No, no,
temporal
no, no, no.
knowledge?
That's not what I said. I didn't say he has temporal relations and he doesn't. I said he has temporal relations but also transcends time. Those two don't contradict each other.
Okay, okay. Yeah. Do you want me to like come back on that or ask you about? I
Sure,
was going to
sure.
go to temporal knowledge or okay, okay. So what are temporal relations then exactly? Like when relations appeal to aspects and temporal dimensions like okay, he relates to you throughout your life, which is temporally extended, so he
Hmm.
has temporal extension in that he has a temporal relation with you at time one whenever you were born all the way through to time 50 or 40, whatever you are, um, kind of thing. So, okay, therefore, yeah, God has the aspect of being temporally extended. But if you're saying it, and at the same time, he transcends this dimension, so he doesn't have it. To me, I just hear you're saying he is temporally extended and he's not temporally extended. And that's just the.
No, no, that actually. doesn't follow. I don't think it follows, because the fact that God is temporarily extended but also transcends time does not mean that because he transcends time, he is therefore not temporally extended. I think he can be both temporarily extended or temporarily. I think he can function within time, and he can relate to creaturely to creatures in time,
Mhm.
but also transcend time. And both of those can be true, and I don't think that they contradict each other. Because to say that God transcends time does not mean that he is not temporally related to time, or that that he cannot exist and function within time. That the fact that he can function within time does not mean that he is not transcendent. So
Okay.
I don't see those as contradictory. But
Okay. So okay, here's my last. Let me try to see if I can get to you this way. This will be my last attempt, and then I want to go on to the temporal knowledge piece.
see if you can reach me.
See if I can persuade you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you made the analogy to God's omnipresence, right? So okay, great. So that's with respect to space. So I think you and I would both agree God is spaceless. He lacks spatial extension and he lacks spatial location. Now, your definition of omnipresent, you would have to say, yeah, but he's also spatial. He's also in the swimming pool. He's also everywhere. I guess when you say that with God's omnipresence, first of all, just to ask you, would you say God has both spatial extension and spatial location, or just spatial location but not spatial extension? Like, is God
No,
spatial?
that no the analogy breaks down at that point, because I don't believe that God has spatial location, but I believe that he can be present in a certain way, in a certain special way, that 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 is that is an extension of his omnipresence. We're getting off kind of in a bunny trail here, but in the Bible we have stories about how God is present in the Ark of the Covenant, or how God is present in the Holy of Holies, or whatever it happens to be, that God inhabits his temple. And I think that there's a sense in which God can inhabit his temple, or inhabit whatever the Bible says he inhabits. I think he can do that in a way that is somehow special and somehow distinct from his omnipresence. And so, if God is present in the Holy of Holies, that's not just because he is everywhere, it's because that he decides that he wants to be present in the Holy of Holies in a way that is rather distinct from his omnipresence. But I don't claim to understand what that looks like, or how that happens. I just think that God can do that, even though it's not a contradiction. And because the Bible speaks of God's presence in specific contexts and at specific times. And if that's the case, I think that's a little bit of I think it's more than just the fact that God is omnipresent, therefore he is everywhere. He's in the Holy of Holies because he's omnipresent, and so he's automatically in the Holy of Holies. But he's in the Holy of Holies in a different way than he is outside of the Holy of Holies. And how that happens, don't ask me.
Yeah,
I just,
yeah, great. Yeah, you answered that perfectly. So I 100% agree, and I'll go further and answer you as to how that happens. In my opinion, I think God's omnipresence means that He is knowledgeable of and causally active at all spatial locations in the universe. And okay, He can be causally active in more significant ways in the temple or versus other areas and stuff. So that's how I would define omnipresence. And as you said, that avoids the contradiction because God is not that definition of omnipresence does not give him spatial dimensions, either extension or location in terms of he himself. So yeah, that's what
well,
I was yeah.
but in a sense, it does give him a spatial location, It just means that spatial that however he does that does not negate the fact that he is omnipresent. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yep, I get where you're
Okay.
coming from.
And the reason I brought that analogy up is because I think the same is true of time. I think that God can be temporally located if he chooses to, and that's how he can relate to his creatures within the created order, within creation, and but also transcend time simultaneously. That both of those things can be true. God can temporally locate himself within time and within creation if he chooses to, and how he does that without negating the fact that he transcends time, I don't know, but I do know that it is not a contradiction.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah. I guess that's it on that. Yeah. What about the Bible? I was looking at some of the questions are bringing up the biblical record and stuff like that. Um, in terms of open theism, I think it's just a blatant contradiction in terms of the Bible is clear. God has foreknowledge and God knows this and that. It's pretty crystal clear in both the original languages and that sort of thing. And yeah, it speaks of him
Yeah,
being omniscient.
and I would say that because open theists typically embrace presentism, which means that the future does not exist, therefore God cannot know it because he cannot know something that does not exist. He knows all that can be known, but the future can't be known because it doesn't exist. And so that they see that not as they don't see that as a limitation on God's knowledge or his omniscience, because in the same way that we affirm that God in his omnipotence can do whatever he decides in his will that he wants to do. He has the power to do anything that he wants to do. And when we say that, we say that God has the power to do everything that is logically possible. But he does not have the power to do something that is logically impossible because that's a category mistake. And so that is not a limitation on his omnipotence. And in the same way, the open theist will say that the fact that God does not know the future, that does not limit his omniscience because they're saying that knowing the future would be something that would be logically impossible, not physically impossible. And and that's where I part company with the open theists because their version of omniscience when it comes to knowing the future is probabilistic and not definite. So God does not know the future perfectly. He knows the future because he's really, really, really good at guessing. He has so much knowledge and knows so much data that is in the present available to him that he can calculate the future really, really well with this extremely high degree of precision. But at the end of the day, it is still probability. It's not certainty. And I would argue that it is not perfect knowledge of the future. It is simply probabilistic knowledge of the future. And 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 I think that the Bible absolutely contradicts that idea. And one of the examples that I would bring up is that Jesus predicted that Peter would deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed twice. And to me, that is a portrayal of of absolute perfect knowledge of the future. Jesus knew that Peter was going to deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed twice. And it is impossible, in my view, to actually to actually make that a probabilistic assertion because if God does not know the future because it doesn't exist, then he would not be able to know that the rooster was going to crow 2 times right after Peter denied Jesus 3 times. So that's I think that's one scriptural reference that I think destroys the open theist idea that God does not know the future perfectly because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree on that. God's not a gambler. He's not the ultimate gambler, or something like that. And there, like, it's common sense. It's a properly basic belief, I would say, that there are contingent future facts. There are contingent future truths. It's true or it can be false as to what free will decision I will make. Will I freely choose to eat a cookie tonight for snack or not? Or, will I freely choose to, I don't know, cook a hamburger for supper tonight or whatever it is? That's a proposition that applies to a future tense, and it can be true or false. That's just something we know in a properly basic belief. And if these propositions can be true, future tense propositions can be true or false, then God would know whether it is true or false. What
Right.
well, whether I will choose or whatever the future thing is. It's not just a prediction. It's not just a guess. It's not, oh, let me take in all the circumstances like a good scientist. Here are all the external things. Therefore, oh, there's a 99.7% probability Dale will eat a cookie tonight for snack. That's not what the Bible says. And Kyle mentions, oh, well, what about all the times where God screws up and makes false predictions and he gets something wrong? First of all, I would question. I don't think there are any false prophecies in the Bible, but remember Deuteronomy. Look, this is the falsification test. If God predicts something or gives a prophecy and it doesn't come to pass, there's no possibility that it won't come to pass. When God, thus saith the Lord, or thus saith God, you know this will happen to Egypt, this will happen to whatever, or the Messiah will do that, will die for our sins and do this and that must come about. If it doesn't, the person is a false prophet and they're representing a false god. It's absolutes in terms of knowing the future, and that's an ultimate test. The Bible makes it a test of whether it's really from God or from a false prophet and an idol or something like that. So yeah,
Okay. Well. Let me try to take a couple things one at a time here. Kyle says that the idea that God is good at guessing is a straw man, and I need to make it clear that when I said he's really good at guessing, that's a hyperbole. What I'm saying is that God's knowledge is ultimately probabilistic under open theism because of the fact that open theism claims that the future is unknowable because it does not exist. And so in my view, that's an extremely precise guess. I still think it's a guess, but if we don't like the idea of guessing, then we can just limit our vocabulary to the idea that this is probabilistic knowledge and not absolute certain knowledge. It's not definite knowledge. And then Kyle also says two things God said would happen both don't end up happening. Now, there's a difference between prophecy and conditional, what we call a conditional. I'm trying to think of the term now. Tell me,
I think
help me
conditional.
out here.
I think conditional prophecy, right? Like, so, like, if
An
if you
implied,
don't repent, I will destroy Nineveh or something like that, right?
right? An implied conditional. That's the word I'm looking for. The term that I'm looking for. There are a lot of implied conditionals in the Bible, and so I could go upstairs and I could see that my wife is boiling eggs on the stove. So I could say to my wife, those eggs are going to explode. Now, what I'm really saying is those eggs are going to explode if you don't take them off the stove at the proper time. But but I'm not actually saying that. I'm just saying to my wife, "Hey, those eggs are going to explode." And so she knows that that's an implied conditional. She knows that what I mean is those eggs are going to explode unless you take them off the stove once they start boiling and you don't leave them there too long. And so God can say, I'm going to destroy Nineveh. And does that mean that if Nineveh is not destroyed, that God was wrong, or that God made a prediction that turned out to be false? No, it's an implied conditional. I'm going to destroy Nineveh unless Nineveh repents. And we know that that implied conditional exists because of the fact that he goes on to tell Jonah, go preach to Nineveh. If you go preach to Nineveh and they repent, then I will not destroy them. But when he first articulates this prediction, I'm going to destroy Nineveh, and it doesn't happen, he might not have actually said at the beginning, unless Nineveh repents. Now, we could go look at the book of Jonah and see what the sequence of events is, but the point is that there are times in the Bible where God says, this is going to happen, and it's an implied conditional. If somebody repents or if something else occurs, then God is not changing his mind. He is simply saying that this is going to happen unless something else happens to intervene and to stop it. And so I think this objection that God said something would happen that doesn't end up happening, I think that objection fails. I don't think it's a valid objection.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add about that. That was what I was referring to. That was the comment where, yeah, there are no false prophecies, proper provable false prophecies. Let's say, and
Right.
if there were, then that would falsify, according to the Bible's own standard. That would falsify. Hey, this is not of God.
Right.
So it's an absolute. Yeah, it's an
Well, let
absolute.
me what I like to do, if it's okay with you, Dale. I would like to move on to the next scripture.
Sure.
There are two scriptures that I want to focus on that I think teach that God absolutely knows the future perfectly, and that this a theory of time or presentism objection, I think it fails. I think it is. I think it is an invalid systematic. And the first one, I'm going to have to go look them up here real quick.
I don't want to distract you. Just before we get into this Bible verse, given it might help because you mentioned that you have a perceptual understanding of God's omniscience, right? He looks and he sees the future. It's all right before him, all of time, all at once, and he can see what the future is from our perspective, or the past and all that all at once. Have you? I myself take kind of a conceptual model where where God knows. It doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist on an A theory of time, so obviously it can't be perceptual. He can't look and see the future, but he can know it on a conceptual level. I'm just curious, would that difference help you at all in terms of accepting an A theory of time and God's knowledge, even on presentism, or do you think that just doesn't work?
Well, I'm not really sure what you mean by a conceptual understanding of foreknowledge, but my understanding of foreknowledge and the way that I frame this, and I could be wrong. I mean, I could be making a mistake here, but my understanding of foreknowledge is that God knows the truth values of all conceivable propositions. And if he knows the truth values of all conceivable propositions, and that's my definition of omniscience, by the way, if that's true, then he knows the truth values of all future propositions. He knows the truth values of whether I will wear a red shirt or a green shirt tomorrow. So the proposition, Phil will wear a green shirt tomorrow, has a truth value. It's either true or false. And God knows the truth value of that specific proposition because he is omniscient, and because he transcends time, and he can see tomorrow. He can see everything that occurs tomorrow exhaustively. And so therefore he knows what color of shirt I'm going to wear tomorrow, because he sees the end from the beginning, because he sees all of history, and he can see it all at the same time, so to speak. And so I don't know what a conceptual model would look like, and I'm not sure how it would impact what I'm talking about when I say that God knows the truth values of all propositions and therefore knows the truth values of propositions that are based on events that have not occurred yet for us.
Yeah, you were describing the conceptual model perfectly right up until the end when you started talking. So, like, pretend my answer. The conceptual model is exactly what you said up until the point of, okay, well, how does God know all these future propositions? For you, I guess you would say, well, the way He knows is He has to look and see what the future will be. Whereas I think He can know just conceptually in light of being a real maximally great being. He knows all those true future propositions, and there's
Okay.
two answers, right? So someone, William Lane Craig or others, will they won't say, they'll say future propositions don't need a truth maker, and therefore he knows in some conceptual way that we don't know how, but he knows. I took the route that I did. I'm a truth maker maximalist, so I do think there is a truth maker grounded in God's knowledge of his own causal potential and what will happen if he actualizes this versus that capacity or stuff like that. So there's
Okay.
other ways other than
Well,
looking and seeing is my point, I think.
when I say that God can see all events in time because he transcends time, he's above it, and he has this bird's eye view of time. When I say that God can see it or observe it, I'm using anthropomorphic language at that point. So I think that I don't think that God literally observes creation and then learns and it acquires data from his observations. So that's an anthropomorphic way of saying that God can see. It's just like the Bible says that God searches the heart. Well, he isn't literally searching for something that he doesn't know exists. And so when the Bible says that God searches, that's also anthropomorphic language. It's a colloquialism. And so if your idea of God's conceptual knowledge is means that God simply knows it because he is omniscient and has and is all knowing, period, then I think that's a good way to put it.
Cool.
Um, so somebody's let me find this other verse here that I don't want to derail my the
Absolutely.
flow here,
Yeah.
and you're not derailing it, by the way. I'm I'm tempted to derail it myself because I'm looking at some of the chat comments and I'm trying to multitask here, and it's kind of hard for kind of a dumb guy like me. So
Welcome to hosting. So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I want
I actually I haven't gotten this down very well yet. Being able to multitask and try to find comments or questions in the chat and try to get to everybody if I possibly can, but also trying to go through a flow. You know, it's kind of hard for me to do that.
I'm just kind of curious. While you're looking up the verses and stuff, so have you ever hosted on? Because you're part of Free Thinking Ministries now, so I'd imagine, my goodness, you must have like hundreds of comments in the live chats and stuff like that. So I wonder how handling that would be.
Oh, actually, I don't know because I haven't actually simulcasted anything on the Free Thinking Ministries channel yet.
Oh, okay, I thought
We
I saw you
we
on.
well, what I'm saying is that I haven't hosted anything that has simulcast on the Free Thinking Ministries, but I have been on the Free Thinking Ministries channel, but I wasn't a host. So
Gotcha.
whenever I appear in the Free Thinking Ministries channel, then that means I'm a guest, and logistically speaking, I'm a guest at that point.
Okay, so something to look forward to then on your end.
Yeah. So what I have is I have a list of verses that the open theists claim supports open theism, And then I have a series of verses that actually establish God's perfect foreknowledge as a maximally great being. And I'm trying to find the dividing line between the two in my notes. I actually have an article that I'm referring to right now that I'm looking at. And the title of the article is The Death of Dynamic Omniscience and Open Theism, a Philosophical, Theological, and Biblical Autopsy. That's the name of this article that I've written. And I'm looking through the article trying to find these verses that I'm citing. And
All right. Well,
okay.
while you're looking that up, I noticed Hudson has something for me, so I'll just talk to the audience to keep them occupied. I
Okay.
don't. What he says? Wow, Hudson TD. Wow, Dale. Open theism false because you say so. Brilliant. Um, yeah, I mean, no. So I have no idea. I'm not sure what he's talking about there, but I never said that. So that's kind of a straw man of whatever I said. I know that much, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious. Maybe Hudson, what was that in? What do you think I just said? Open theism is false because I say so.
Well, I don't think you're begging the question if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just kind of curious why he typed that comment. What was it in reference to what I was saying, so I could answer him. But
Or are you so you're asking him?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because I was giving you time to find your verses, so I
Okay.
was engaging with the audience. So yeah.
All right. I'll shut up and let you interact with him.
No, no problem. Well, we have Chris Lucas, so he's a fan of both of our shows. He's saying it just seems like everything is dead, and in the past, in the closed theist view, because they say from God's perspective, everything is in the past. There is no present or future in God's perspective. Um, so yeah, I don't see that at all. I mean, God has a past, present, and future, and the only thing that exists ontologically on my view of time, on the A theory of time, is the present. So it's not true that everything exists in the past from God, from a closed theist view. Um,
Yeah. Well, and okay, I'll let you if he has a question or if he has a response to that, then you can interact with it. I
okay.
didn't know that you could see the chat, so but if you can see it, that's great.
Yep. Yeah, I've got it. Okay. So yeah, he just follows up, and I'll let this be the last thing. If you're ready, not from God's perspective, under closed theism, there's no present or future. Everything is in the past. If it's settled, it's past for God. Um, yeah, it's in terms of
Mm,
his knowledge. It's look, he knows that it will come about, but he knows in the sense of it's a future tense proposition for him. So it's not past for God in any meaningful sense. It's just yes, he knows what will happen in the future.
right.
Um,
That's a category mistake because nothing can be past for God. It can be past for God if he functions temporally within creation and within time. But since he transcends time, in that sense, nothing is past for God because it's settled in the sense that God knows it. And so the fact that God knows it doesn't mean that he is experiencing it as the past or as the future or as the present.
good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you find your
Okay,
verses?
so let me bring up one psalm. Bring up Psalm 139, verse 4. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. And so this speaks to the fact that before I say something, God knows what I'm going to say. And it says you know it completely. And I don't have time to actually look up the Hebrew for the term completely, but if I remember correctly, I think that it means that he knows it perfectly, that he knows it, that it's unimpeachable for him. He knows it absolutely. He knows it in the sense that it's not just something that he knew would probably occur, and that he happened to be right. I think that the term actually means that he knows it perfectly. And I think that Psalm 139:4 is a strong indication of God's absolute foreknowledge, not just a probabilistic foreknowledge of something that doesn't exist until it occurs. But the other verse that I think is even stronger is Isaiah 41. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at Isaiah 41, and I'm going to put it on the screen. And I think it'll be helpful if we can actually look at it and go through the text a little bit. So bear with me for just a second. Isaiah 41. And then let's pull this down into its own window. I'm doing this on the fly here, so
I'll just say,
bear.
take care, Richard R. As you're bringing it up, Richard R. says he had to take off. So, thanks for joining in, Richard, and listening in while you were there.
Oh yes, definitely. Thank you. And I'm glad you saw that, because I don't see everything here that's going on. I wish I could interact with every comment, but it's just simply not realistic. So
Absolutely.
so I
That's
ask
why
for
I'm here.
everyone's. That's why you're here. That's right.
All right.
All right. So Isaiah 41, starting with verse 21. Set forth your case, says the Lord. Bring your proofs, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring them and tell us what is to happen. Okay, that's extremely important. Tell us what is to happen. Tell us the former things that they are, or what they are, that we may consider them, that we may know their outcome, or declare to us things to come. Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Do good or do harm, that we may be dismayed and terrified. Behold, you are nothing, and your work is less than nothing. An abomination is he who chooses you. And so it's extremely important to look at verse 22 and to see that the test for a true God, the test for true deity, is that being can accurately predict the future. That can accurately tell us what is going to happen in the future. Let them bring them and tell us what is to happen. Tell us the former things, and then in verse 23, tell us what is to come hereafter, in the future, that we may know that you are God. So what God is saying, and this is God talking, by the way, what God is saying is that the test of true deity is that you can tell us what's going to happen that has not happened yet. And that if you can't tell me the future perfectly, then that means that you are not a true God, that you're not true deity. This is God's own test of deity. It's not a test that some human beings made up. This is God's own test of deity. And what I'd like to do, if you can indulge me a little bit, I want to read from the article that I wrote, and what I say here is, this is the most devastating text for open theism. God throws down the gauntlet before the idols and false gods. Demonstrate divine authority by doing what the only true God can do: declare what is to come. The Hebrew arkaret, or whatever, afterward, or the future, refers to unfolding historical events. God sets foreknowledge, not power, not presence, not miracles, as the litmus test of deity. If a being cannot declare future events, it is not God. Period. Full stop. This is not merely a functional challenge. It is an ontological claim. Exhaustive foreknowledge is intrinsic to what it means to be God. Open theism's God, who cannot know what free creatures will do, fails this test. If foreknowledge is what marks out true deity from idols, and the God of open theism lacks it, then he is no more worthy of worship than the mute stones of Babylon. The entire structure of redemptive history, from the prophecies of Cyrus to the birth of Christ to the betrayal of Judas to denial by Peter, is scaffolded on the premise that the future is knowable and known, and that God knows it. He simply knows it, period.
Yeah, and one thing I'm noticing in the chat, some people are saying, well, Phil, you silly rube, don't you know that this verse is just talking about, they didn't literally say that, but they're saying, don't you know this is he's predicting what God will do in the future. Of course God knows what he would do. It's not predicting, future states of affairs necessarily. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's talking about the future things that God will do, and of course he can know what he's going to do in advance.
That I'm afraid that objection fails. Look at verse 22. Let them bring them and tell us what is to happen. It doesn't say, tell us what I'm going to do. It says, tell them what is to happen. Because the false gods are the test of the false gods is not, what are you false gods going to do? The test is not what I'm going to do. The test is what is to happen. And then it says, tell us the former things, what they are, that we may consider them. In other words, the former things are things that occurred in history. Those are things that happened in history, and that could have been a result of what God did in history, but they're still, what happened is still the focus. It's not what I'm going to do. That we may know their outcome or declare to us the things to come. So I don't think that objection fails. Or I don't think that objection succeeds. I think that God is talking about historical events, and He's saying, point to the past historical events and explain them. Tell them what they are. Tell them what happened. Tell them what they meant, and then tell me what the future historical events are that are going to happen. And I don't think that that's I don't think it's a reference to what God is going to do. I think it's a reference to what's going to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's clear in the context, in terms of other ways that God treats false prophets and stuff like that. This knowledge of things that will come aren't just referring to things that God will purposefully do. It's talking about things in general, as Phil was saying, and that's the demarcator, right? It establishes God versus all false gods, but also false prophets and human beings. But look, human beings can easily, I can predict what I will do. I promise you, I predict I will have, toast for breakfast tomorrow. And by golly, I can make it happen. So that makes God's not that special then, because he's just predicting what he will do. He's predicting his own self-fulfilling prophecies. What's remarkable about that? There's no divine sign about that or anything like that. So no,
Yeah,
it's the sign itself is, hey, I can predict all future events and tell you what they will be in advance. That's why the
right,
people go, wow, it's God, not because, hey, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do in the future and then I'm going to do it and you're going to be amazed. That's not what this is
right.
saying.
Well, Kyle is trying to tell us that this is not a knowledge claim; it's a power claim.
Yeah,
But
that's what I was just trying to say.
yeah,
It's not. It's not like, declare to us the miraculous things that you're going to do, and we'll marvel at your power and stuff like that. No, it's predicting the future event. It's the knowledge that is getting the Israelites to go, wow, you're from God, you're a false prophet or something like that. So it's a knowledge claim, not a power claim.
yeah, no, yeah, that's true. We're not adding anything to the text. What we're doing is we're looking at the text and we're saying to the false gods, tell us what is to come. And the only way that the false gods can tell what is to come is to know what is to come. It's not tell us what you're going to do. It says tell us what is to come, that we may know that you are gods. So, and it also refers to doing, but it absolutely refers to knowledge, refers to knowledge of what is going to occur. Tell us of former things, and then declare to us the things to come. If it meant that declare to us what you're going to do, then it would say declare to us the things that you are going to do, things that you are going to accomplish, and it is much broader than that. So yeah, so this objection absolutely fails, and and there are other verses that I have in this article. I don't think I have time to go through all of them. We're at the hour and 45 minutes mark at this point, but but that is the litmus test for godhood, is to be able to say, to be able to tell you what is going to happen in the future. The only way that you can tell somebody what's going to happen in the future is if you know the future. So, and there are tons of scholars who actually have affirmed this, and so I'm not the only one. I'm not just making this up on my own. This is not, this is not just an arbitrary thing. The context clearly tells us that the litmus test for being a god is that you can tell us what's going to happen in the future, and what's going to happen is the focus. Even though there's also a reference to something that false gods may do, or that God can do, but that doesn't negate the fact that it is still telling us about what's going to happen in the future in terms of historical events. All right, so I'm gonna. All right, we can go through more verses if you like, but
Yeah,
I think
totally.
it's yeah, I think it's Jesus accurately foretold the betrayal of Judas, and there are prophecies that foretold the birth of Christ, and whenever these prophecies occur, where they're foretelling the future, they actually have specific details that God could not have, if the future didn't exist, that would not be available to a probabilistic formula or a probabilistic system. That and so I just don't know how open theism can cope with the absolute details that seem to be unrelated to simply knowing what a person is like, and therefore being able to accurately predict what they're going to do. So you can give me your take on that, Dale.
Yeah, like I'm totally fully on board with what you're saying and that sort of thing. But I thought one thing that might be helpful, just to end on the biblical end, is look, me and you we're both Molinists and stuff like that. So you've given kind of proof that God does know future tense propositions and their truth value and stuff like that with absolute certainty, not just a probabilistic guess or anything like that. Do you think there are any Bible verses that prove that God has what we would call middle knowledge at all? That he knows future tense propositions about people's creaturely freedom and what they will freely choose to do? Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely counterfactuals of creaturely freedom in the Bible, but first I want to I want to address this. He knows what he's going to do. Scholars that support you isn't an argument. Well, I think you're making a mistake here, Kyle, because I'm not saying that because the scholars support me, that my conclusion is true. I'm saying that scholars support me or in agreement with me. I'm simply drawing the conclusion that I'm not making this up. That's all I'm saying about that. So I'm not arguing that it's true because scholars support me. I'm arguing that I'm not making it up because other scholars have said the same thing. So lots and lots of fallacies flying around the room here. So
No, I see Hudson got back to me. Remember, I was trying to answer his question, so he's a little bit behind in the live stream, but he mentions. So sorry, Dale, I'm 20 minutes behind. His comment, about me just begging the question and stuff. It was a response to what I said in the beginning, where I said I think open theism is a blatant contradiction, and I think he's referring to like how I was saying philosophically, I have objections to it, and also I think it contradicts the scripture. But hopefully, Hudson, when you catch up to this, you'll see. Look, me and Phil have been actually citing some scriptures as a basis for that. Whether you agree or disagree with us, we do have a scriptural basis. We're not just kind of begging the question and saying, oh yeah, open theism, I don't like that, therefore it contradicts scripture. No, we do have reasons that we're presenting for you guys to consider.
yeah, and as far as the subjunctive conditionals and the counterfactuals are concerned, probably the best, and there's lots of examples, but probably the best one is Matthew 11:21. If the miracles performed in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. So this is a counterfactual of creaturely freedom. This is saying that if these conditions existed, this is what would have occurred, or this is what people would have done or would have chosen. And so it's extremely clear. And there are others, but I don't have them at my fingertips at the moment. But the other thing that I want to cover real quickly before we end here, I think I'm going to have to wrap up pretty soon. But I don't want this to go on to 4 hours the way that I've been teased about before. So
No
the other
worries.
thing that we need to pay attention to is that the open theist argument is that under presentism, the future does not exist and therefore is not knowable, is unknowable. Only the present exists. Now, I want to focus on this and make sure that this is clearly understood. According to presentism, the future does not exist, but the past does not exist either. The past does not exist under presentism. So my argument is if the future is unknowable because it doesn't exist, then it follows that the past is also unknowable because it also doesn't exist. And so if you want to maintain presentism, or if the open theist wants to maintain presentism, then they're faced with an extremely potent logical contradiction because they claim that God does know the past. They just claim that God doesn't know the future because it's unknowable. Well, if the future doesn't exist means that it's unknowable, and they claim that the past doesn't exist either, then they have to affirm that the past is also unknowable. Yet they affirm that the past is knowable and that God knows the past perfectly. And so this is an internal contradiction in open theism. And so, and it also relates to the the uh, the grounding objection, because the grounding objection is absolutely necessary for open theism. If the grounding objection is not true, open theism falls apart. So give me your take on that, Dale.
Yeah. Okay, so believe it or not, I hate to be a traitor. I'm going to agree with the open theists on this one in terms of knowledge of the past. So, number one, Chris Lucas says that they do have evidence in the present that they can infer something on the past or something. But one thing I would say is, what if they don't go for presentism? Could open theists go for possibilism, or the growing past model of someone like Michael Toole, where the past and the present exist, but it's like a growing block, so the future doesn't exist. Could open theism be married to like a possibilism view of time, maybe, and that would solve that issue?
You tell me. You think it solves it?
If it were true, I think it would, but I have independent reasons I don't think the past doesn't exist. ontologically. I think presentism is the correct view, but just in terms of logically, if it were true, let's pretend it were, that could solve that issue in terms of the grounding objection. But even if you don't believe in that, I think Chris Lucas, his point's correct that we have evidence in the present which we can use to infer knowledge about the past, but to ground it. Do you think that
And
works?
well, that's problematic because what is the evidence of the present? What does it look like?
Well,
And 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 by the way, we're talking about what these things are for God. We're not talking about what these things are for people. So what is this evidence of the past that allows God to know because he has evidence? I mean, we just got through talking about conceptualism where God's omnipotence, or I'm sorry, omniscience is based on conceptualism. And conceptualism and evidence are not the same thing. Those two are incompatible with each other. If we suddenly want to say that God knows something because of evidence, then we've just abandoned conceptualism at that point.
do you think maybe last thing, memory, maybe it could be great. Memory is a source of evidence, so maybe that could be the evidence for open theist. And again, I'm not on the open theist side, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here because,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah.
Yeah, I've dealt with I deal with the objections based on memory, and I deal with the objections based on evidence in my article, and I would recommend that people read it, but I haven't published it yet. But when I publish that, I recommend that people do read it. And the problem is that if the grounding objection is true, and open theism relies on the grounding objection, it depends on the grounding objection. If the grounding objection is false, then the idea that the future is unknowable is suddenly incoherent. So, based on the grounding objection, what happens is that if the past doesn't exist, the past is divorced from all truth makers at that point. And if that's the case, then God is divorced from truth makers based on the past not existing. And so the problem of the future being unknowable also presents a problem for the past being unknowable. You can't, the open theist can't just willy nilly appeal to some vague concept of memory because what's happened is that the past has been divorced from its truth makers because it doesn't exist. The whole idea of the grounding objection is that existence grounds truth, and therefore existence grounds the knowledge of truth. But if the existence is removed, the truth makers and the entire knowledge of that truth is removed along with it. You can't just appeal to some special pleading and just some question begging idea of memory or evidence, because God doesn't believe things because of evidence. He believes things conceptually. He knows things conceptually. He doesn't just have beliefs, he has absolute knowledge. And so evidence points to beliefs. And that whole framework is completely incompatible with conceptualism. So if we want to adopt that framework, we have to abandon conceptualism. But if we abandon conceptualism, we've landed in a whole lot more problems than we had at the beginning.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Happy to let it go because I know you want to do your 2 hour limits and stuff like that. But yeah,
Oh,
sorry to turn into an open theist there for a couple seconds, but
yeah, no, I'm not that concerned about the 2 hour. I'm concerned about it for you more than I am for me. I know sometimes your time can be limited,
oh,
but
yeah, no, I'm good.
yeah.
Whatever you need. So I'm here to support you.
So this does not portray an ignorance of presentism. This is actually expanding on and following the implications of presentism where they lead. And so if someone doesn't think that those implications are valid, then they're the ones that are ignorant of presentism, not me. So I think that's extremely important for us to point out.
Yeah, I do think just for you open theists, I think it would be good ground. Again, assuming Phil's objection works, kind of thing, right? Obviously, I'm a little bit skeptical, as you guys would be, but let's pretend it works here with this grounding objection. You have this nonsense understanding about, well, if the future doesn't exist, you can't know, and then, well, if the past doesn't exist, you can't know because it has to exist ontologically for some reason. Then maybe try to marry open theism to like a possibilism view of time, this growing block model. I don't know if any open theists have tried that, but that might be a good area of research for you guys to look into.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, what I'd like to do is go through my theory of time real
Yeah.
quickly, and I'm calling it the P theory of time. And so this is a theological model of divine temporality and transcendence. So the P theory of time is a theological model affirming that God, as the eternal creator, exists ontologically prior to time, transcends all temporal succession, and yet can freely enter and experience time within the created order. Time is a real feature of creation, not an illusion or a divine attribute. While God is not intrinsically temporal, he voluntarily engages with temporal creatures in history. God's knowledge encompasses all tensed and tenseless truths, including future contingents, without necessitating determinism. God's eternal vision of all events does not collapse them into metaphysical simultaneity, but sees each according to its proper temporal location. This model preserves divine aseity, omniscience, immutability, and libertarian freedom. So the core affirmations of the P theory of time. 1. God is eternal and exists prior to time. God is not temporal by nature. Time is part of the created order initiated by God's creative act. Number 2, time is real, objective, and created. Temporal becoming is a genuine feature of the created world. The past, present, and future are not illusions or mere mental artifacts. 3, God transcends time and sees all moments eternally. God knows all events, past, present, and future, as they truly are, without being bound to their sequence. He sees the end from the beginning because all of history is laid out before him. And you can look at Isaiah 46. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say my purpose will stand and I will do what I please. Number 4, God can freely enter and experience time. Though God is timeless in essence, he voluntarily interacts with his creatures within time, especially in the incarnation, providence, covenant, and judgment. Number 5, God's knowledge is eternal and complete, including future contingents. God knows all that will happen without causing it to happen. His eternal vision encompasses every free act, not as fixed by decree, but as fully visible in his timeless awareness. 6, God's foreknowledge does not imply determinism. What God eternally knows will happen happens freely. God's knowing does not cause it. There is a difference between actuality and necessity. 7, temporal distinctions are preserved in God's knowledge. God knows what is true in each moment, but he does not collapse those moments into eternal simultaneity. Bob's final glorification is real and complete in God's knowledge, but God also sees Bob's earlier sinful life as past, not as equally true now. And I've got some anticipated objections, and if you want to hear those, I'd be happy to share those with you as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear them.
So, objection 1, if God experiences time, doesn't that make him mutable? The response is no. God's essential nature does not change. His experience of time is voluntary and relational, not necessary or imposed. God is not becoming in his essence. Entering time does not change his being, just as Christ's incarnation does not imply a change in divine nature, but an added human nature. God's actions within time are real, but they do not imply metaphysical mutation. Objection 2, if God knows future free acts, aren't they fixed and necessary? Response is no. What God knows will happen, he knows because it will actually happen, not because it must. Knowledge of an event does not determine it. There is a difference between certainty and necessity, and between knowledge and causation. God's knowledge is grounded in his perfect vision of what free agents actually choose, not in a deterministic decree. Objection 3. Doesn't divine foreknowledge eliminate libertarian freedom? Response. Only if one commits the modal fallacy of assuming that knowing X implies causing X. But God's knowing what you will freely choose doesn't remove your ability to choose otherwise. It sees what happens because it happens, but does not make it happen. Objection 4. Isn't it incoherent for God to be both timeless and temporal? Response. Only if one assumes God is temporal by nature. The P-theory affirms that God is timeless in essence and eternally transcendent, but able to engage with the temporal world by his own volition. This incarnation or interaction with time is an act of condescension, not an ontological change. He is outside of time metaphysically, but active within it relationally. Objection 5. Doesn't eternal knowledge of past sin mean God is forever seeing our wickedness? Response. No, God sees each moment as it is, not as eternally present. He sees your past sins as past and your glorification as final. Eternal awareness does not entail metaphysical simultaneity. God's relational disposition is governed by the moral and covenantal meaning of each moment, not by a static reel of co-equal time slices. So my conclusion is the P-theory of time provides a theologically grounded, philosophically coherent model of time, of divine temporality and omniscience. It affirms that God created time, exists eternally prior to it, and yet genuinely engages within it. It upholds libertarian freedom while safeguarding the complete foreknowledge and sovereign transcendence of God. It preserves real history, meaningful relationship, and exhaustive divine knowledge without collapsing into determinism, open theism, or classical impassibility. This model offers a faithful alternative to the rigid fatalism of the B theory and the epistemic impoverishment of presentism. God is not trapped in time, nor is he sealed off from it. He is the Lord of time, and he is present in history not because he needs it, but because he wills to walk among us.
All right. Yeah. So there's a lot of what you said there that I like, right? So I fully agree. I didn't get everything there, but I fully agree with you. Look, God's essential divine nature includes the attribute of eternality, but that doesn't speak to, okay, well, what mode does that eternality take? Is it timeless? Is it temporal? Eternally temporal, or is it as Phil's arguing for the P notion of um, some kind of combination? It's both, I guess, in some way, right? In some sense. So yeah, I don't think the Bible requires us to have to know the answer to that in order to be saved, as long as we recognize He is eternal, and it's not,
Right.
His temporal nature and or timelessness. That's not an essential divine attribute. He could be either, and or as Phil's arguing, he could be both. I still just have that main issue that I think inherently saying both does violate the logical law of non-contradiction, because it is kind of saying he has these temporal relations and temporal aspects like extension and dimensions like extension and location, at the very least at certain points in time and stuff like that. And at the same time, he also doesn't have it. And the only way to get out of that is you can say, well, kind of like with omnipresence, maybe he has both of these things, but not in the same sense, or something like that. And you're just saying, I don't know what that other sense would be. And yeah, I guess on my end, I just say I don't think there could be any senses in which it could be make sense or something like that, and that's why I remain sort of skeptical on my end there.
Well, I think that the idea that that's a contradiction, I think, relies on a category mistake, as I said before, because the fact that God can partake in and can be involved in time in a functional sense does not mean that he is time bound and that he is in that he must be involved in time or confined to time in a metaphysical or ontological sense. So those are two different categories, and as long as you make sure that you separate those categories in a way that is organized and is actually clearly articulated, I don't think the contradiction exists, because the contradiction would conflate the ontology of God with the functionality of God, or the ontology of God with the existential involvement in time that he chooses to have. And so, as long as those category mistakes are avoided, and as long as those categories are not conflated, I think the contradiction disappears.
Fair enough. And okay, and I see Hudson saying like, what is time, kind of thing, and we haven't answered that. But yeah, for me, what is time? I kind of agree with a lot of the. It's this notion of change, right? It's this entity that of change, right? Sequential change and stuff like that. I don't think that we're referring to measurements of time or something like that. That's something that we have developed as human beings to help us keep track of time and stuff like that, right? Clocks, sundials, whatever it is, water dripping into a bucket as the Egyptians used to do. Whatever those measures are, that's not time, right? Those are measures of time. But time itself is this change, and that's why I think, Phil, you were smart to point. I would disagree with it, but you were smart to try to say, like, look, the act of creation or the creation of time doesn't entail some kind of metaphysical change on God's part, and that's where the debate. If there was a change, well, then yeah, you're saying God's temporal, and that's where I think me and the open theist would be saying, yeah, that is a change. Look, he's got new temporal relations and all these things that never existed before. But you're saying that that's a functional change, not a metaphysical thing. So
Right. Well, and I've often thought about the definition of time, and I don't actually have this nailed down perfectly yet. Whether or not I can nail something down perfectly is an open question. But I don't know that we can actually define what time is. I'm not even sure that that's possible for human beings. But I think that human beings know what time is intuitively. And and so I think what we can do is we can describe time, and we can identify the attributes of time. For example, time has a beginning, time moves forward and never moves backward, and that kind of thing. I think those are all descriptions of time. Those are all attributes or properties of time. I don't know that we have to define time in order to identify the various aspects of what time is like and what how we can describe it. But I do think that Scripture affirms that that time had a beginning. And so when, let's see, there was a comment here that says, when did God create time? And that was Hudson. He says, what is time, and when did God create time? And I think I just given an answer to what time is. And my answer is, I'm not sure we can exactly define what time is. But I think we can describe it, and I think we can understand its nature, even if we can't understand its ontology. And and then when did God create time? Well, my answer is going to sound rather tautological, and some people might think that's nonsensical. But my answer is, God created time at the beginning of time. So, and I think Scripture affirms that time had a beginning. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 9 says, He has saved us and called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of His own purpose and grace. This grace was given us in Christ Jesus before the beginning of time. So I think Scripture clearly tells us that time had a beginning, and that there is a valid expression of before the beginning of time, not in a temporal sense, but in a logical and ontological sense. That there is an ontological state where time did not exist. And when I say did not exist, I should probably say there's an ontological state where time does not exist. And that God in his aseity existed or exists prior to time. And I'm trying to avoid that all this tense vocabulary. God exists prior to time, logically prior to time, ontologically prior to time, and that time does not stretch back to an infinite past. Because if time stretches back to an infinite past, then then the present moment could never arrive, because it's impossible to traverse an infinite domain. So I hope that kind of answers a little bit of the question. I Kyle made a a comment here that I think is extremely helpful. He says humans often define time with special terms, and I suggest that that's a mistake. And I agree with Kyle here. I think, Kyle, you're right. I think that is a mistake. There's some things that I think that human beings can know and kind of understand intuitively, even if they can't define it, because defining it is beyond their intellectual capacity. And but that doesn't mean that we can't understand time to a certain degree and that we can't describe it. So bravo, Kyle, for that comment. I think you nailed it there. So Dale, I'm going to give you the opportunity for some closing comments, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up after that.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so I just want to say thank you very much for the conversation and for inviting me to come on. I like yourself, am a hardcore Molinist. I definitely agree that there are future tense propositions related to creaturely free will or otherwise, and that as part of God's omniscience, He knows what the truth value of all of those propositions, and I think it's a denial of God's omniscience to say otherwise, or to speculate that these propositions don't exist and therefore God doesn't know them or something like that. At the same time, I do think that God changes. I think that God is currently temporal, and He's been temporal. He created time 14.8 billion years ago is when time came into it. That's when God created, right, the universe, according to our best estimates. Find Big Bang, right?
Well, that opens up a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I subscribe to a young universe model.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, either 14
Anyway,
or 6,000 or 10,000. Yeah, whatever Phil goes for. But either way, point is, I think that dynamic omniscience in the sense that God's knowledge changes with respect to certain tensed propositions. That's actually true. Yeah, I agree with Warren and the dynamic omniscience on that. But I draw the line.
I would. So next time we talk, we can pursue that idea, because what I can ask you is, does the fact that the object of God's knowledge changes, does that mean that God's knowledge itself changes? So I would differentiate between the content of God's knowledge and the ontological reality of God's knowledge. So, because if I say tomorrow it's going to be 55 degrees outside, does my knowledge actually change, or does the content of my knowledge change? And I would say that the content changes, but my knowledge remains an attribute of my nature. And if that's the case, then knowledge as an attribute of my nature does not change. It's simply that the content of that knowledge changes from day to day because I'm a time-bound being. So that could be a good segue into the next conversation that we might want to have on it. So,
Absolutely.
and I'm sorry if I derailed your
No,
closing
no.
thoughts. That was
I'm
kind of rude of me to do that.
No worries.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So that was me, everyone. No, but yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'd love to do that because there is that argument for the A theory of time that it's a very technical one, right? Submit language. And the fact that we have tensed language and stuff like that, these words tomorrow, today, they're meaningful in an ontological sense. That's what I'll argue, and you can argue against that. But the last thing I
yeah.
want to say for the closing word for this show is look, there's something me and Phil never addressed. Regardless of what the Bible teaches and that sort of thing, is open theism, are you damned to hell if you believe this? Can you still be a saved Christian if you're an open theist? And that's something that I just thought about in relation to this show, and I'm not sure I have a set answer for it. I think what my answer would be is that I believe it is essential to be a saved Christian. You have to believe that God is omniscient. I think if you flat out deny God's omniscience, then you are believing in a different God. You're not believing in the God of the Bible of this maximally great being. But with open theists, I don't think that's what they're doing because they have this nuanced view where they're saying, no, but God is omniscient. But it's just we're denying that there are true propositions that correspond to this. So, yeah, there's nothing to know. God is the maximally great being, and he's fully omniscient. He knows all true propositions. It's just are there these propositions or not? So this is what I think. I think open theists could be saved Christians, but they're just mistaken on this front. But if you deny God's omniscience outright, like you say, no, God just doesn't know these things, then I'd be a little iffy. Yeah, I'd be interested in Phil's thoughts on that front because, like I said, I'm
Okay.
working it out.
Well, I would first of all, I would say that whether someone is saved or not is above my pay grade, and and secondly, I have said the same thing about Calvinists because a lot of people will challenge me and say, "Well, Phil, if you believe that Calvinism is false, and if you believe that Calvinism is a different gospel by implication, then doesn't that mean that Calvinists are not saved?" And my reply is no, doesn't mean Calvinists are not saved. And and again, because it's above my pay grade, I think Calvinists can be mistaken. I think we can all have false theological beliefs and still be saved. And so, we do have, I think we all do have false theological beliefs. We just don't necessarily know what they are. And what I would say now is the same thing that I have said frequently in the past. I could be wrong. I am not infallible. I could be wrong about these things. And if whether or not I'm wrong about them is going to have an impact on my status as a saved Christian, then we're all in trouble because we could all be wrong. None of us are infallible. So that's kind of a few ideas about that. But I like what you had to say about it, Dale, and I value it.
Do, do
Just
you?
real quickly, what I want to do is just real quickly, I want to address. Kyle says before the beginning of time, and that passage could simply be poetic, and and I think that's a faulty. I think that's a faulty assessment because the the genre of First Timothy is a pastoral letter, and the genre is not poetry. The genre is prose, and so I don't think we can sneak in a an alternate genre at that point in that epistle and just simply say, "Well, no, this is poetic," and it stops being poetic, and then it proceeds on the original genre of the letter, and so I would say no, that's not poetic. I think, and then he says it doesn't need to be taken as a lesson on metaphysics, and And I agree with that in principle because Paul is not talking about metaphysics. He's not referring to metaphysics, but there can still be phrases and statements and propositions in in the Bible where we're not dealing with a lesson on metaphysics, but you can still have pointers to metaphysical truth in the scriptures and as a reference to when things occurred and those and that kind of thing. So it just because it's not a lesson on metaphysics, just because it's not a dissertation on metaphysics, doesn't mean that it can't have or contain or express metaphysical truth. So
Is it okay if I just answer one question from Kyle in 2 minutes?
sure,
And if you say no, I won't. Okay. So it's put it up
no,
that position that requires affirmation of omniscience. That's the if you put that one up. It's like the
I'm
second.
sorry. What?
It says that position that requires affirmation of omniscience is from philosophical classical theism, not Christianity. So yeah, there. So no, it's not, Kyle. Believe it or not, and again, I'm not. I'm just working these out recently, kind of thing. But it comes from actually Richard Bauckham's divine identity thesis. So I think I would argue that omniscience, the Bible teaches omniscience. Yes, I would need to prove that and stuff like that. But I think it clearly teaches God has omniscience, and that I would say it's a part of the divine identity itself, given how
Right.
Richard Bauckham defines it. So this is a concept from biblical scholarship, right? Because Richard Bauckham has those things that define the divine identity. And I would argue through implication, omniscience is a part of that divine identity, of him being sovereign and having that cultic monotheism, as Bauckham puts it, and also creational monotheism. So this is biblical. It has nothing to do with philosophy, actually. Why I would say that. Yeah, I just wanted
Yeah.
to answer that.
Well, and also the Bible is clear about omniscience because the Bible says that God is greater than our hearts and he knows all things. So that's a pretty clear statement of omniscience at that point. But the fact that you can find omniscience in philosophical classical theism doesn't mean that it isn't that it's incompatible with Christianity or that it's at odds with Christianity. There are a lot of things about philosophical classical theism that could be compatible with and in harmony with Christianity. So this is a glaring false dichotomy here that we require this affirmation of omniscience from classical theism and not Christianity. It can be both and and so I think we need to try to do our best to try to avoid false dichotomies and mistakes in reasoning like that. So anyway, I said we were going to do closing comments, and I said we were going to sign off, and here we are. We're still going. So,
I will shut up.
and that's partly my fault. So that's yeah. And by the way, again, I need to stop reading the comments because
Right. Yeah.
Kyle says those definitions are classical theism, and that's absolutely true. Doesn't mean that it's not also endemic to Christianity. So, all right, I'm gonna stop reading comments. I'm not gonna read any more. I'm gonna take the comments off my screen, and we're gonna.
But thank you to all you guys were giving great comments.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that you're all so wrong, but still great comment. Just joking.
Yeah. We'll pray for your souls, for all you people that are wrong. No, they are good comments, and I don't want anyone to think that I don't appreciate them. I appreciate input,
Yeah,
and at the end of the day, I could be wrong, and I'm not infallible, and so I I value and I celebrate input from opposing ideologies, and so that's why these kinds of discussions are so important. It keeps me honest when I'm challenged like this, and so that's a good thing, and that's a productive thing. And Dale keeps me honest because he challenges me on things, and if that's the case, if I'm kept honest, that means I'm going to be kept humble, and that's my prayer about all of these things. So I think we will continue this conversation. There's a whole lot more ground we could cover on open theism, and we could unpack some of these things in more detail. So maybe we can make this the start of a series, because I think it's important, and I think Christians need to be aware of this issue, and I think they need to be aware of the arguments for and against, and they need to be aware ultimately of what the scriptures have to say about it. And I would argue, and I will stand on this position, that the scriptures actually deny open theism. And we'll be able to explore this further as we go along, but that's where my position is at this point. So
Yeah, absolutely. Same. Ditto for me. And yeah, I look forward to coming back and doing this series. And not to mention, we also have, I haven't forgot about the other series where you're my guest on the ecumenical councils. But probably going to take me a couple months to get back to that and stuff. But I haven't forgotten about that either. So yeah.
okay. Well, I'm not an expert on the ecumenical councils, but I know a little bit about them, and I can do some research on some of those issues if you'd like to let me know in advance, whether that's the case. I do have a compelling interest in the ecumenical councils because they have a relationship to divine authority, to scriptural authority, and to human authority, and what all those dynamics look like. So it's definitely something that I'm interested in, something that's worth talking about. But you may want to give me a heads up so that I can do a little homework beforehand. So
Sounds good. Yeah, it's going to be
yeah.
a while still. I'm more interested to focus on the open theism for now. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Well, as my friend Paul Clark would say, sharpen your axe, and let's make our discipleship dynamic and powerful based on the knowledge of God and based on our dedication to Him. So let's never abandon that objective, and let's keep the faith. So thanks everybody, and so long.
Bye bye.